My new book is now available for purchase at your preferred online bookseller. We Chose Play, Raising an Autistic Child to Thrive and Feel Understood. Learn more at affectautism.com/we-chose-play, all one word. Affect Autism, in its 10th year of providing free, supportive content for your DIR journey.
All of Affect Autism's podcasts are produced and edited by Daria Brown. Please note that the views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved, do not constitute educational or medical advice, and do not necessarily reflect the views of Affect Autism, Daria Brown, nor ICDL and associated parties. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with their individual circumstances for specific support.
You're listening to DIR Dialogues, a podcast from Affect Autism, where a panel of practitioners discuss topics related to the developmental, individual differences, relationship-based, or DIR model and its practice.
Welcome back, Floortimers. I am so excited to have another edition of DIR Dialogues, and the topic today is setting limits in Floortime. It tends to be something that's really challenging for some parents, like me, to do when we are scared of walking on eggshells around our children if we set a limit and they have a meltdown. But Floortime is not just about following the child's lead and doing whatever they want to do, and I have other podcasts about that. It does involve firm boundaries, and we're going to talk about that today with my 5 DIR expert training leader guests, starting here with Bridget Palmer. She is a speech language therapist in Buffalo, New York. She works full-time for the International Council on Development and Learning. Welcome back, Bridget.
Hello.
We also have Catherine Murray, who is a clinical social worker and infant and early childhood mental health specialist in Chicago. She's the coordinator of the training program for the International Council on Development and Learning, and it's her first time at Affect Autism's We Chose Play podcast. Welcome, Catherine. We also have returning guest Sanette Laurens. She is an occupational therapist in Northern California in private practice called Sensorium Therapy, and she has a passionate interest in attachment and trauma. Welcome back, Sanette.
Thank you.
We also have returning guest music therapist, Dr. John Carpente, who is the founder and director of the Rebecca Center for Music Therapy at Molloy University. Welcome back, John. He's in Long Island. And last but never least, Stephanie Peters. I miss you so much. We haven't seen each other in a while. She is an occupational therapist working with Kinder Growth Therapy that provides DIR services in New Jersey that are covered by Medicaid. She's been on the podcast many times, but not in a while. So welcome back, Stephanie.
Hi, thank you.
So let's get into this topic. I will link back to 2 blog posts I've done. And in those blog posts, I give quotes from Engaging Autism that Dr. Stanley Greenspan talked about, how, when we set limits, a lot of times we think about discipline, like if you don't do that, then this, and how, consequences can backfire. And all of that was covered in previous podcasts. I think there's a simple quote where Dr. Greenspan says, when parents have a difficult time setting limits, self-reflection might be in order. And, that can be a little for some parents because we're in the thick of things and the last thing we're going to do is sit down and self-reflect. But for those that can, we can cover that. Also, I know Dr. Gordon Neufeld talks about setting limits, and I put this in one of those blog posts as well, that it's might be easier to set limits around things that are out of your control first. So for instance, I gave the example how when my son was younger, we loved going for walks, seeing all the local fountains. And then one day uncle came over and we said, let's go show him the fountain. We get there and I forgot it was after Labor Day. All the city water was shut off. So, oh no, the fountain's shut off. Ask the man, ask the man. And I'm like, there's no man I can ask. Sorry, it's out of my control. Or you go to a store to buy something the child wants. The store's closed. Nothing you can do about it. And even then, I feel like a lot of parents would panic because the meltdown's coming. Bridget, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Because you do parent support groups and you work with families all of the time. I imagine you come across this.
I do. I think the very first thing that comes to mind is that my stomach has this feeling of, oh no, for the parent, because they're the ones with the child. They're the one in the emotion. They're the one in the minute. And so I really feel a sense of compassion and empathy for the parent. I also want the parent to know that the wish is to ride the wave, that the emotional range is important, it's developmental, it's how we want to be. I want to be a grown-up who can feel happy, excited, disappointed, frustrated, mad, hungry, tired, happy, all those things. And so we start that developmentally all along. And so I'm thinking about that feeling of the parent feeling, I can do this with my child can do this with me. We can feel these big feelings together.
Going through the upset together. Catherine.
So one of the first things I think about is along the lines of the quote you alluded to from Dr. Greenspan about how helpful self-reflection can be, because I set limits in really wacky places, and then I'm stuck maintaining them and enforcing them. And I have these moments of, what was I thinking when I said no to that, or not yet? Like, where did that come from? And so I think I agree with everything Bridget said, but then I also think about how helpful it can be to recognize where limits are being set and why we want to set them there, either in the moment or even as we're trying to like enforce them. And I know we'll talk a lot, and you in your other blog post, Aria, you talked a lot about the limits and boundaries being developmentally appropriate in their expectation of the child and within the relationship between the parent and the child. So if we start with that as like a given, then the next part for me is where are we starting with limits and boundaries, and where did that come from that we say no to 5 extra strawberries or a handful more of goldfish, like wherever the things are, oftentimes our limits are quite arbitrary. And when it's related to safety, it means something else. But for a lot of the boundary setting is a lot of gray area of how did we choose that as the boundary?
You made me think of a few things. I facilitate parent support meetings for ICDL, and one parent was saying, I always want to set a limit at home that would match something that I didn't want my child to do in public, because if they do something at home, they think it's okay to do it in public. And that brought up a whole discussion of why do we set limits in the first place, and when is it okay to, and another parent said, yes, but at home, sometimes they experiment with things that they can't do in public. So we want to give them that opportunity. And so it was an interesting discussion. The other thing that made me think of is I'll link back to a couple of blog posts I did with Jackie Bartell, special educator in New York, who did 2 topics with me, challenging behaviors at home and challenging behaviors at school. And we went through some examples in there with setting limits with my son. And again, depending on the child's developmental capacities, where your child could be involved in setting the limits. I'll go right now to Sinette.
Yeah, I just want to echo the deep, deep respect for parents and what they carry and what they're trying to hold. And when you're trying to set limits, you are in the moment. You are trying to manage the behavior in the moment, but you're also thinking about how you are shaping them for the moments to come. And the first thing that comes to mind is the parents, because you are the anchor and you are the one who has to assess the situation, the safety, and manage the behavior and also what is to come. So if the first and foremost is what is your regulation, like what is happening for you? What is the meaning you make of this behavior, of this moment? Because it is hard. You carry such a tension when you have to set a limit. You carry the tension between, reading the child's emotional signals, seeing how hard the discomfort that they feel, as you're setting your limit, but also they know that it's the right thing to do. And then when you set the limit, you really have to hold the line, and that's so uncomfortable for you. So what is your capacity to actually be regulated in that, and to then not only initiate the limit, but then holding the limit in continued compassion and empathy? It's very, very difficult, and your own fear of the behavior. And if you've had a lot of meltdowns in the past, that has a predictive quality that can affect the way you will regulate and the way you will problem solve. So the parent is the absolute anchor point to hold this situation, but also to problem solve. You need that problem solving. And so I think first and foremost is to do your own work. The self-reflection is how, even going so back to your own childhood, how was intense moments handled in my family always me? What is the meaning for it for me? Because that's still sitting in your nervous system. If you had a loud parent or a strict parent, where you weren't felt, but you had to shut down and show up, shut down and show up, do the right thing, that has a meaning for your nervous system and for the way you will hold the situation, and oftentimes that has an automaticity. So really thinking about the meaning and the meaning that it has for you to sit in discomfort, because it is, I'm a parent myself with multiple children, and it is so hard, the discomfort, you know. So really unpacking the meaning making, because that's the beginning of starting to be more regulated and anchored. And when you are regulated, you can access your whole brain, and you can access the problem solving, the creative out of the box solutions that you often need, So I'm thinking of a situation where a mother, she had an autistic child, and the biggest challenge was getting out the door to go to preschool, and she wouldn't put shoes on. She couldn't put shoes on, and it was a very big challenge, especially in the when the weather was colder. So she had multiple shoes in the car and at the preschool. So she planned ahead, but it was still, she had multiple children to get in the car, multiple children with special needs, and this situation. And so it was a big pain for her. But we went through the DIR coaching, and she turned the situation into an interaction where she would actually just take that time out, sit with the child, and be silly, or it became an interaction that really met the reward system for the child for connection. And within 3 days, the child was totally doing it. So it's not a normal way of, limit setting. We need, the logic and but it was using the interaction and bringing joy and meeting the child's reward system. In that case was the turning point. But the mom could access it because we worked on some of these prerequisites, the meaning making you have, and then, her own regulation.
Yes, such important points that you make. And it makes me think of a conversation with Dr. Gil Tippy that I had recently, that some people in this podcast were witness to, where my son has been obsessed with the movie Dog Man, and Dog Man jumps and licks the chief. And the chief falls over and he's like, oh, get off me, get off me. And my son thinks it's hilarious. So he's always trying to lick me. And I'm saying, no, stop it. You're not a dog, this and that. And I said, you know what, though? He would never even attempt to do that with dad. So Dr. Tippy said, okay, let me step back and say, what is in your mind when he's doing that? And right off the bat, I thought, you got me. Because what am I actually thinking? I'm thinking, oh, he's so cute. He's so funny. My 16-year-old, who's not a baby anymore, that's what I'm thinking. So that limit is not coming across as very firm. And then you also made me think about what another parent brought up in parent support group about limit setting, which is that whole, and I think she got this from Dr. Tippy when she was at an intensive at the DIR Institute last summer, that if you yourself aren't calm, then that's going to be a problem setting limits. And all of you alluded to that regulation piece, which I'm sure we'll get into as well. But if the parent sounds calm, but they have a stiff presence, or they're standing over the kid like this while they're being calm, even that is transmitted. So that's interesting. And then the other thing that I thought of is I will link back to another podcast I did with Michelle Abraham Montgomery, who talked about her role as a glam mom. I know that, Sanette, you are a recent grandmother as well, and how her role changed differently in setting limits with her own children versus with grandchildren. So another side note. But let's move on to you, John.
There's a lot of things. I'm trying to connect the dots. There's so many great ideas everyone spoke about, but to try and piggyback, or to start at I guess at ground zero, I think, in my experience of coaching, parents are still trying to figure out what floor time is. And so the whole thing, and I think also that when you have a hard time engaging and kind of being your child's therapist, you look for reasons to make it challenging too. And a lot of times it comes out when I meet with the parent alone. It's usually a microcosm sometimes of how they be with the child. And so the limit setting sometimes happens between me and the parent. and then kind of talking about what that might be like for the child in play. But getting back to the floor time piece of it, I think you brought it up earlier, Daria, that some people think you could do that. Floor time means you could do whatever you want, and that's the furthest thing from the truth, because the limit setting is where the work is, so the child can test the bounds of reality, of their reality onto something. Otherwise, nothing becomes real. And so then what happens in the home, and then it gets transferred to outside. It's not really their fault because they haven't really tested the bounds. So, but at the same time, I'm trying to point out where the child is developmentally, and also the parent too. Not that the parent is not at the developmental level, but they might not have the capacity yet to provide the opportunity at that developmental level, so the child can understand and incorporate it. Because if we set a limit that's beyond their developmental capacity, we'd have to teach that skill set in every context. If we provide the opportunity within the developmental framework, in a relational context, using our affect, we're building on those foundational capacities that then get transferred. Because if you think about it, if we're teaching someone to, I don't know, whatever that might be, in a punitive way, okay, now I'm taking this away from you because you're playing with it too much. They don't understand what's the problem. I was playing with it yesterday. What does time mean, right? Then it's almost like, dare I say it, ABA, stimulus response, stimulus response. But if we're really looking from the bottom up, then we have to try to figure out, well, how can I provide the opportunity for this limit setting in a way that the child understands, while also catering to the individual differences of the child. And as a coach, I'm trying to do that with the parent too, because sometimes they just want answers, and I get it. I totally get it. But because it's a dynamical model, it has to come within this relationship-based frame. Like you all mentioned about the co-regulation piece, because even though the parent might be like dying inside, there's a kind of transference that emerges that they're not really aware of. That they're interacting with the child of when he was 3, not when he's 12 or 13. And a lot of that comes with, it's hard to see a child at 16, 17, because that's our need to keep them that little. Like Derry, you were mentioning when your boy was licking you, and like that. Oh, that's so true. It was so, and we want that connection, but sometimes we're stuck in time. For whatever reason, everyone has their own thing, of why that is, to be able to be present as opposed to distorting the, really what that means, I think, is that there's a distortion of reality within the relationship. You're not interacting with the child of who they are in that present time, it's who they were or who you wish them to be. And so it's this thing that doesn't work. And then the other piece, that not always it happens, and it depends also on if the parent's ready to hear this, because we're also trying to assess their challenges, and I don't want to interrupt our relationship too by making an intervention with a parent, to make an intervention that might be a reflection of something, where sometimes like the parent that comes in late, or always, or pays late. It's not about the paying late, it comes in late. It's like, well, how do you think it makes me feel when I got to go back and document? And it's not because I'm mad, although some therapists might say, I don't like this. There's always that parent you don't like, or the child you don't like. Let's be honest. Come on. Can't love everybody. But when the observing ego comes out and you see that, I wonder if this parent might relive this at home. What's the dynamic if dad or partner is there, and how that unfolds for the child. So it's like, it's so complex. I think that the first thing is finding the vibe of the parent, and to see that could be just a natural progression of how that transfers at home and how we can help support that. And then show them how to provide an opportunity that's co-regulated, but that the child actually understands. And the other thing, you do it once or twice, it's not going to work. The consistency and the commitment to that makes it really hard, because you're not getting, well, he's still doing this when I just say, no, he's trying to understand So we have to do this all the time. This has to be at the playground or in the ball field or at home, at dinner. And there's ways of even bringing it up. If a child can get, say they're at level 5, and they can take the past and bring it into the future and make sense of it. You could bring it up when they're co-regulated by saying, hey, I really like the way you were able to you go back into that boundary you set where they might have had a hard time. And now they're regulated, you're eating dinner or whatnot. And it seems like that's the other thing. When do you do it? It seems like a good time to bring this up. Oh, I really like the way you were able to, I don't know, hold off on that cookie or share with your sister or whatnot. That was really important, but I saw that, then you threw it at her, so, why did you do that? If they could do the why question, so that's kind of what I'm thinking.
You went off on so many important tangents. I think 5 podcasts.
I need boundaries.
No, it's all so good. And I mean, this should be an ICD hint, Catherine. This should be a course in the future at ICDL. You made me think of the podcast I did with Dr. Joshua Fader on repetition in autism, how our kids will do things over and over again in different ways to explore. And they're like little scientists trying to figure stuff out. So yeah, sometimes it's going to take a while. Like, oh, well, when mom is busy and I go to try and lick her like Dogman did, the chief, she's snapping at me. But when she's not busy, she's laughing. What's going on here? Or whatever, you know what I mean? And the other thing is, some of the stuff you brought up early on, like Floortime is about limit setting and really understanding and transferring that idea of limits. So important with our kids because, like, my child has never in his life done anything unsupervised. I mean, aside from being in the house in one room while parents are in another room, but he's never had a chance to go for a walk down the street by himself. He's never had a play date with kids where they just go in the woods and find sticks and find frogs and all those things that some of us, I didn't, when we were little, did. I'm a scaredy cat. I didn't play with frogs and stuff like that. But you know what I mean? Like I went on my bike all around the neighborhood all by myself, went to the kids' house down the street and played. Our kids don't do those kinds of things, so they don't really have these opportunities to set limits. We're always jumping in and setting the limits for them, the adults. So that was such an important point, John. I love that. Stephanie.
So when I think about limit setting, I have like a 2-pronged approach in my mind. So one, it's keeping in mind the like this functional idea of really what DIR is, which is this challenge of I've got a brain that is not really connected to your brain with a wire. And so all being social is I have an idea and you might have a different idea. And how do we work together to have some sort of shared meaning of ideas and make a plan on what to do next? Oftentimes with limit setting, someone's idea is very different than our idea. And so part of the work is, rather than the challenge of like, well, my idea, because it's a limit, you have to follow my idea. But what is your idea? Let's really think deeply about your idea. Why do you think that? What does it mean to you? And then, okay, well, I hear you say blah, 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 or to what extent developmentally you can communicate that, but I know this is really important to you. This is an idea. I totally get that. And on the other hand, there's another fact to keep in mind. And how do we socially figure that out together? So that's one piece of, there is still a lot of room to have back and forth, even when we're setting limits. So it's not to shift away from, I say, this is how it's going to be, and then we're done. That's it. Unless it's like, you can't hold that samurai sword. I don't have the time to have the back and forth with you, but that's not the normal boundary, hopefully, that we're setting. So there's that aspect. And then there's the other aspect of being really aware of why, because this is something I heard you say in the beginning, Daria, of why do we want to avoid a meltdown? And so I'm asking, why are meltdowns so bad? And I know that's a silly question to ask, because of course they're terrible, but also on the other hand, like, why are they terrible? And that's something that we can dig deeper. And I think that's what everybody has been saying of, the reason why a meltdown is so scary and so bad is actually quite different for everybody. I had one family I worked with that the son, who was older, would grab a knife and bolt out of the house if there was a meltdown. And so that's a really big deal, obviously, but you still have to respond in a way that is not fear-based in order to support and attune to that interaction. And then there was another family that's afraid that her child is going to fall down and get hurt. And so like a lot of fear-based, well, what exactly are you afraid of? And then how does that impact how we initially respond and try to control and make everything super safe? Is it a fear-based because it's going to make me feel really icky because I need this emotional content to not be there because I can't handle being sad or mad or see you being sad or mad? Is it, I know that my neighbors can hear my kids screaming as we're trying to get into the car to go to school in the morning, and that's very shameful. There's so many different combinations. Is it because I know I'm already late for school or work and school and work, and I can't afford to have another delay in my routine? And so that's something I'm thinking about. What is making us so afraid of a meltdown? Because to Bridget's point in the beginning, there's nothing wrong with it. The goal is to sit in it and to be in it. But why is it so hard? Like, why do we bend over backwards to avoid it? Because the work is not avoiding it. The work is actually to be in it, because that's how we do that first point I had of how do we still connect, even when things are really confusing and don't make sense socially. I say something that doesn't make sense to you, and something in the environment is happening that doesn't make sense to you, and I don't understand it. That's the social work that we're all working for. And so those 2 points have to kind of be done simultaneously or separately, but also happening at the same time.
You came out with shining colors, even though you had to go last, Stephanie. Some amazing points. You made me think of when you talked about what's going through the parent's mind. Autism is genetic, so the parents are probably neurodivergent themselves, or at least some are. And a lot of autistic people like having control. And that's certainly my case. Like, I like being in control of everything. And if I'm not, I start to panic. And as I mentioned, I'm a scaredy cat. So if my son does anything that he might hurt himself, like right away, I'm like, I'm panicked. And so that's one point. The other point, based on what you said, reminded me of how I said in one of those blog posts about limit setting from a few years back, Dr. Greenspan talked about doing more floor time with the child to really practice playing and all of that, which made me think of Dr. Kathy Platzman saying pennies in the bank. So when you build that relationship with the child and you have that trust with them, and I feel like that's my biggest strong point with my son, is he so feels safe with me, and he so knows that I understand him inside and out, and I can speak for him, and I know what he's thinking and everything else, that we've built up so many pennies in the bank, or that trust together, that when I do say, I need you to stop that right now, a lot of times he will listen because we have those pennies in the bank. Now, certainly if it's like, put your iPad down now, you're in the middle of the most fun Mario Kart race ever, but I need you to come here right now. Okay, that's going to be really hard for him, the transitions piece. And in the podcast with Carrie Siskowski, she talked about that too, where, if your kid's in the middle of doing something and you're trying to pull them out, it's not necessarily limit setting, but try and think about being in the child's situation. So if you're in the middle of your favorite TV show and someone tries to pull you out of that, how are you going to feel? So all of these things popping up, hearing everybody else speak, did anyone have a burning desire to pop in on any of those points?
This is something I love about DIR and Floortime, that it gives us a way to understand that tension and the conflict, even when there's pushback and separation that's inherent with a boundary. I'm mad at you for setting a limit on me. I feel thwarted. I feel angry. I feel frustrated. I feel desperate or hopeless because you've told me I can't do something that I wanted to do, was intending to do something, whatever the thing is. So my intention is being inhibited externally. Well, I'm really mad at you. And what we know about FEDC4 is that conflict can exist at the same time within a relationship as love and intimacy and concern for the other, because like you were saying, Stephanie, we have these separate minds and we can stay connected because we know that relationships can contain all of these different feelings, not just that I'm experiencing, but that I'm now experiencing in relation to you. I'm mad at you, and you're the person I love more than everything else in the world. And oh, I'm suddenly capable of also being mad at you and raging at you or falling down and, you know, whatever the things are. So I love that about DIR, that it helps us to understand that between parents and children, and then what that frees up for us in all relationships. I think that's the other piece of this, that then we can say, oh, you know what? In my family growing up, it was just a mandate. It was just a directive. And, you know, go sit with your feelings, go eat your feelings, go, you know, manage them silently, and then come back when you're ready to be with us, or, you know, whatever it was, whatever the family pattern is that we've experienced that shapes how we believe we are capable of this wide range of feelings in a relationship, shapes, you know, what we think our child or the child we're with is capable of.
Sinette did the podcast with me and Katie Shepard on functional emotional developmental capacity 4, complex communication and shared problem solving. And before we get there, Sinette, I just wanted to say that Catherine made me think of the whole concept that Gil Tippy instilled in me last August at the intensive. Daria, you're using your floor time voice with your son. You can be yourself now. He's 16. Now, he told me that 10 years ago, for the record. And think about how long it's taken me. And I'm still in floor time mode when I'm with my son. Oh, that's really cool. How about this? You know, like floor timey. And when his dad hears me talk like that, he's like, your baby talking to him again, you know, and just being yourself, and that concept of it's okay to have rupture and repair that we talk about, you know, too. Like I can be mad at him. And so I started saying stuff like that in front of him now. I started saying, I'm really mad at you right now for doing that, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, Dr. Tibby said, you can very firmly set a limit and be stern. And in the next breath say, and here's your lovely waffles, dear. Like and again, in one of those blog posts about limit setting, I said, you know, it's being the Neufeld's saying is the agent of futility and the angel of comfort at the same time. And I think Greenspan in Building Healthy Minds worded it as you know, firm resolve and something or other. Anyway, it's like it's okay to set these limits and be yourself and then come back. And anyway, it gets back to the pennies in the bank thing. But go ahead, Sinette. I love that you brought it back to let's like looking at the D, the I, and the R, because we need to dive into that too. There's so much to cover. We could be here for 5 hours. Go ahead, Sinette.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there is. It is a lot. I mean, I had a conversation with Christy Gosey yesterday, who is also a DIR expert here in Fresno, and we talked for more than an hour about it. It's such a rich subject, and even this panel, we're not even covering, we're just maybe not even a tenth of the subject. There's so much more to say, and you just referred to the tension I was saying between that futility but the comfort. What's your capacity based on your history? But I just wanted to go back to what Stephanie said about ideas, and then Catherine went into FEDC for your capacity. And what came up between Christy and I in our conversation is when the child have an idea, that idea, I want this, or I want to, let's say it's an unsafe idea, I want to climb this, you know, or I want this. The idea is imbued with an emotional function. You know, it's that dual coding. There's a urge. There's so much meaning. There's emotional investment in the idea. And when you come and you look at it from a developmental point of view, we want to say, how can I be with the child, and how can this become a shared world, and how can I entice Wu and be with the child so that we can share the power? You know, because oftentimes as limit setting, I think as parents, we think I have the power and I have to say no. But can I think of it that the child is sitting with the urge, And how can I consider that? And what does it look like to share the power to say, hey, um, I can see this, and but this is unsafe for you. So it's not necessarily reasoning or bringing the cognition to the child, but being with them. So I think, and that is the fourth capacity, is about sensing the being open to the ideas of the other, but in limit setting, we reframe it in the sense of what does it look like to share the power, to be in a shared world around that urge, that need.
Yeah, it makes me think of Gil Tippy saying we want to instill the spirit of inquiry in our kids. So, wait a sec, what is it that mom has in her head that's different than is in my head? And that's how you can start to foster the development of that capacity before kids get there. Bridget?
I think what I wanted to add is I like that word urge, and I've never really thought of it as an urge. I like to think of if a child or an individual has an idea, they're holding something in their mind, so they have that urge, they have the intent. We've been talking a lot about that capacity for that shared social problem solving, that sense of self, that complex gestural communication. And I'm thinking of most of the children in my career have been in the earlier foundational capacities, that co-regulation, that interest in the people and the things, that engagement, that relatedness, that string of connection. If this is you and this is me, that string of connection between us, maybe getting to that opening and closing circles where I can respond to you, you can respond to me, I can woo you, you can woo me. And when the big feelings come in those capacities, that is where I've spent most of my career, where the child or the individual doesn't yet understand why I can't do something or why something can't happen or that's not safe or the whatever. And so I really like to think about that experience of being able to comfort and soothe and be nearby. And what does that involve? Because sometimes too much touch is too much, or too many words are too much, or all of the things. It might be, I'm going to be here. I won't look at you, but I'm nearby you, and letting them know, or putting your hand out so that they know that you're close by. And I'm thinking of two examples because I think one thing, Daria, that you and I know from our parent groups and caregiver groups is that people are like, well, how do I do it in the moment, or what happens next? And so I'm going to give a couple of examples. I had a family, I was at their house, and their little girl wanted to go to the aquarium. It was one of her favorite things in the world, and it was nighttime, if I remember, or it was late, and the aquarium was closed, and she was really overwhelmed. And she went into, they had cubbies in the living room, if I remember correctly, and she made herself, she was probably 3 or 4, and she made herself really small, and she got in that cubby, and mom was nearby. And I remember mom not gazing at her directly, and I think saying, I'm here, I know you want to go to the aquarium, oh, I wish we could go, and putting out her hand near her and sharing that experience with her. They spent that time feeling overwhelmed that the aquarium was closed and overwhelmed that they couldn't go to the aquarium. And then they were able to, ride that wave together. And just because I have another example, I was at a little guy's house. Again, he was probably 3 or 4. He wanted to go out in the rain. I didn't want to go out in the rain. I didn't want to go on the swings in the rain. Someone else might have. I did not. And we were at the door, and he was really angry, really upset, and he didn't yet have spoken words, but he was letting me know we wanted to go outside. And he was using that complex gestural communication and eye gaze and maybe leading me to the door. And I remember very specifically, he pushed up my sweatshirt and he pretended to pinch me. He didn't pinch me, but he absolutely pretended, like, I am really angry. Why are we not going outside? I would like to go outside. And you're right. You're right. I wish we could go out. You seem really mad. I wish we could go outside right now. And in both of those instances, it was the parent in the first staying connected, and in the second, me staying connected. But the big feelings were there because, as Stephanie said, the big feelings are the real things that happen. We communicate in the way that we can communicate. And we want to hold in mind, what does the other understand in our facial expressions, our sounds, our words, our actions, our gestures? Do they have a shared understanding of what's happening, that the aquarium is closed or that it's raining and I don't want to go outside, even though you really want to go outside? So what do they understand? And then, do we have an ability to express ourselves together? Can we be communication partners, both in what we understand and what we can express? And it's all of those systems, because it's our ability to have a sensory system, an affective system, a motor system, a communication system, an emotional system, a family system. There was a little girl, lives in Buffalo, New York. We have snow, and when it's cold, it is cold. Daria's in Toronto. She knows when it's cold, it's cold. Catherine's in Chicago. This little girl had just started using photographs, and if I remember correctly, the mother said the story was that she indicated she wanted to go for a walk in the wagon, and the little girl, I believe, had used a photograph to let the mother know. And she said, well, it's freezing cold out, but I had to go in the wagon, because she asked to go in the wagon. And I said, I'm so glad you were able to go in the wagon, but what did you want to do? She said, I didn't want to go. It was really cold. I didn't want to go in the wagon. And I said, you get to set a limit about when you want to go in the wagon and when you don't want to go in the wagon, and that you get to feel sad with your daughter because she didn't get to go in the wagon. Now, she did that day. But what, could you go in the wagon in the living room? Could you, maybe there's a way to still go in the wagon? Or is it that you're going to be your daughter's going to be really overwhelmed because now she has a communication system that you both understand, but you can't go in the wagon because it's really cold outside.
Another aspect of this, the podcast I did about emotion seeking and saying no. It's so important that we let our kids set their own limits too. So maybe we can foster that by saying, like, well, what do you think? Is it okay if I do this? And it reminds me of something Dave Nelson said to me when I saw him in New York at the conference like 2 years ago. He said, I said something about my son was, touching people, hitting people, and he said, well, do you always ask permission when you give him a hug or when you touch him in any way, like, like hug, like put your shoulder on him or whatever? And I said, no. And he said, start doing that. Start asking your son for permission. Is it okay if I kiss your cheek? Because my son has the cutest, like, sweetest, big, puffy cheeks that I just kiss him all the time. And he's my little sweetheart, right? But he's 16 now. So first of all, does he want mom kissing his cheek? And so I'll say, like, we always have this thing we've done since he was little where I go like a vacuum and he goes like this and sticks his cheek out like with a proud look on his face. It's adorable. But he's 16 now. So is it okay if I give you a hug now? Stuff like that. So that's the first thing. Another thing you made me think about is staying connected through big feelings when you have disagreements. Like, I think that point has been echoed a few times. How do we stay connected through those things? And that can be tricky for parents. And again, it's about our own self-regulation. I'll link back to the podcast I did on parent self-regulation with an autistic mother. The other thing, the double empathy theory. So a lot of autistics and autistics get each other, but when you mix autistics and neurotypicals, so I'm thinking of an example on the person who, one of the Autistic Culture podcast, Dr. Angela Kingdon, talked about her TED Talk where she was told she had to memorize her speech. And she literally took that as, I have to memorize my speech, and just found that she wasn't able to do that. And when she actually spoke to the person, they're like, oh, I don't mean word for word. It's okay as long as you roughly hit the points. And she's like, okay, well, that's not memorizing. So, autistic people sometimes want literal meaning of things, and they don't understand the nuance, or neurotypicals think that saying something means all these other things. But to an autistic person, no, it means this. I've had lots of things go over my head like that. So that's important to think about. Our kids may not understand when we say, oh, I'll be a few minutes, or like time is hard because time, comes in the higher capacities, but things that we say, they take literally. The other thing was impulsivity. And so I think that falls under what you were saying, Bridget. You're working with children in the early foundational capacities who aren't at the point yet where they really understand that someone else has a different idea in their head. They're not yet at that theory of mind stage that develops in the fourth capacity, or they might not be consistently there. So my son's always been very impulsive. So if a little kid is doing something impulsively, they're not really in control of their behavior. So to assume that they did that on purpose is going to backfire as well. So because they don't understand that what they did was wrong because they're just doing it impulsively. But now my son being 16, he's still very impulsive and he wants what he wants now. And, I want to go back. I want to go back. When are we going back? What day? What time? He wants to know, right? And so that's when I'm co-regulating with him. Like, I can't wait to come back. Remember, we came before and we came back again. It's going to happen again. First we're going to do this, and then next month we have this thing happening, and then we get to go back, and, just doing that whole co-regulating. So those are all the pieces that came up based on what you said, Bridget. What thoughts came up for you guys?
Yeah, so to piggyback on Gary, what you were saying, I think I alluded to this earlier. Understanding the person's eye, the individual differences, and where they are is so important to be able to provide that opportunity. And in doing so, I was thinking about I try to use the idea of not judging but joining. So sometimes linguistics get in the way. And like say if a kid's hitting and you say no hitting, they might not really quite get that. But let's say if they hit and I start crying, I join into the story, into the drama. I start crying and letting them know that you hurt me. You hurt me. Now, it's not that I'm trying to, I think they all have capacity for empathy. It's just that I have to deliver it in a way that they can understand it. So here's a story with the child that I worked with, the mom. This is exactly what happened. And so mom said, yeah, so he's been having a hard time today when they came in to see me. And I said, what's going on? So lately he's hitting a lot, pinching. And I go, what do you do when he does that? And she's got all black and blues on her arm, Now we know that they love each other. That's not, it's just, I'm just curious. So she says, I say, no, you don't do that. I said, well, next time maybe join in and to let him know what happened, to give him more clues affectively. He might not be able to understand the affect coming through prosody, but maybe he might understand the facial affect that goes along with that. And maybe rubbing your arm. And so a week or two passes by, right? And she's on the floor with him. And I'm just watching. And he whacks her. And so she does it, right? She joins in. It's like, oh, that hurt. She's using words, but limited words, not a lot of language, but crying and rubbing her arm. And all of a sudden, the child has a tear coming out of his eye and he starts rubbing her arm. I'm getting chills now. I was like, oh my God. Did he learn empathy in that moment? Of course not. There's no way you can teach that. And I don't believe you can teach empathy anyway. It's experience. And so, the point of this is that by joining in, he's seeing the impact that he had when he does this. If a child's not at the fourth capacity, I don't know how we can teach stuff that they can do in the future. I remember Gil and I used to work together at the Rebecca School a million years ago. We used to get into great discussions after school. And we talked about, man, anyone who loves kids can get them to level 3. But to get to level 4 is really hard. The rupturing, repair, the willingness to have to grow too as the person that's playing, whether it be the parent or the therapist. And I think that takes like this clear identity of my individual challenges that are going on, And Darry, you've been so open and honest, with I appreciate that with your process with your child. I just think that happens always in different contexts. And when the example you said, let the child know that you're going to ask the permission. I love that, respecting that, because how else are they going to learn to know that you don't kiss just anybody at any time? because they see you, and then you ask permission that he might not understand right now that, this is your space and I want to respect it because his environment's been so set for him, the way you said it, so there's no, you covered every basis, so there wouldn't be any ruptures, and I get it. I mean, I do that as a parent. I've done that, and I got to get better at that as my, parent of neurotypical kids. Is that, sometimes there's guilt. Sometimes, I don't know, there's things that you just want to protect them for whatever reason, because that's how maybe I was raised too. And then I did the same acting out, and et cetera, et cetera. So the cycle. So as the coach, floor-time person, I try to get into it sometimes with parents that want to go there, say, who is going to break the cycle? Who's going to break the cycle? Because that's the person that is ready to experience pain. Yeah, on the side of the parent, right? Who is going to break the cycle? And if we know that's really hard. It sounds a lot easier than what it is, but it's a whole emotional thing that you're undoing generations of upbringing. And so I think that's, Catherine was talking about what she loves about the model. I agree with you. And it lends itself to all of these things because it's dynamical. People, I think, may not, I mean, I don't know. My opinion is this is psychotherapeutic, what we do, even though if it's on the floor and it was with blocks, or it's just doing floor time. Floor time is not, that's the other thing. People think it has to be on the floor. It's just a philosophy. I could do floor time with an adult in talk therapy. It's just a way of being with people. And I think that has to be delineated in some way. So to understand, how John, or the parent or whatever is impacting this dynamic. Because if I don't have that, the coach can give the answers. Next time he does this, do that. Right? Okay, I'm going to do this now. It's a checklist as opposed to like, are you meeting the affect and what's going on intrapersonally now? So you can now utilize that. Like with the example of the parent, when I mentioned to the parent, join in the play. When that was over, we chatted about that. And I said, what was that like? She said, it was incredible. I said, why do you think that happened? And it also equates back to, you said someone said, you collect equity, with relation. That wasn't the word. That's what,
pennies in the bank.
pennies in the bank. All of that equity or pennies in the bank has been there. It's now being checked into. And so when the parent was unfolding a little bit to me, saying, well, that was how I was raised, more in a punitive way with hitting and things like that. And so what was it like to be in that? And then, explain that it's hard to play. It's hard to let go and to be emotionally there and play. It's hard to play when you get to be our age because we've already created all these shelters. It's like, yeah, I just think the the congruence between intra and inter is super duper important and so hard. And that's what makes DIR great, but I think it makes it hard because there's no answers. There's no answers because everybody's different.
And across situations, environments, time, the same person is different. So
right.
It's always dynamic, and that's part of the challenge of floor time. I'll point people to the upcoming ICDL conference in October, where Dr. Gil Tippy is going to be giving a fabulous talk about at least 5 ways to improve your floor time, where, floor time is so often misunderstood. And, what's the real purpose of it? And it's helping developmental growth, regardless who the person is or what age they are. You really made me think about the mental health piece. And parents really feel this pressure to be perfect all the time. And if I'm doing floor time, I need to be doing floor time all the time. And just, it's okay that you snapped once or twice. And that whole piece that Dr. Tippy said, you can be yourself, you can rupture and repair, etc. But it really is a pressure that parents feel like, if my child's going to develop, I have to do this and I have to keep, they put this pressure on themselves. And then the other piece that's been brought up, and I know Sinette referred to it, as this meaning making, and when I talked about double empathy, just understanding what it means to each person. And Stephanie said the same thing, like how, what are you thinking? What am I thinking?
Yeah, I want to reassure anyone who's listening that experts get it wrong all the time, and there's a really big difference between seeing as like the expert, seeing somebody and being available to support your child in a clinic, than being in home with all of the compounded stressors that you are constantly managing and showing up super regulated and tuning perfectly with your own kid. Like real life is not what you see in the clinic. The clinic is the pennies in the bank. Like the outpatient experience is like this perfectly attuned environment. That's the pennies in the bank. Transferring that to home is super hard. Like when you're planning laundry and meal prep and cleaning up and like being covered in a pee-pee accident and the dog's barking and people calling from work and partner stuff and like all of that super hard. And then when you're trying to set a limit with your kid and that emotional range of yourself to have the space to be regulated and really connected with somebody else, that's hard for the grown-up. What I will say, can you hear the train? That's for your son, Daria. That's, I paid them to come by now. But what I will say is the best advice I have like for short term is if there's a meltdown and you're in the middle of a meltdown, semi feeling like a crisis emergency situation, if I could give one piece of advice, it would be to take a breath in your head, stop whatever thought train is going on and say, I love you and we are going to totally figure this out together. And then instead of jumping back to your kid, what's wrong? You're okay. Stop. Just sit there and take 5 deep breaths and let yourself have the permission of time. I promise you that you are not reinforcing any behavior that's going to continue by sitting there in the moment. You are freeing your brain up to think and be connected with somebody else. You're improving your regulation and preventing you responding from a fear-based way. And also, if you get it wrong, it's also pretty cool because then you just get to have more circles to figure it out a little bit more. So I know a lot of grown-ups that if you get it wrong with them, I hate you, like you don't get me, like we're done. It happens to grown-ups too, just as it happens with kids. So the responsibility of being a grown-up and the caregiver to your child is you have to be a little bit more flexible and you kind of have to keep showing up. But the gift in keep showing up is you get to keep trying. So giving yourself permission to let it be another opportunity is a gift.
I know we could do so many more podcasts diving deeper. And if any of you want to, just email me, or if anyone listening says, that was great, I want to hear more of this or more of this. And I know parents are saying, okay, but give me the takeaways. Again, like John said, it's really hard to do because your child is different. Your situation is different. Everything's different. But hopefully we touched on a bunch of ideas here. Last thoughts.
I just want to say curiosity, really always be curious, remain curious. Whatever is driving the child, excuse me, in that moment, the individual differences and the why, and that's a whole conversation to have. But I find so oftentimes when I are reflecting with parents about a behavioral challenge, it is the I, it is the chasing the why, as Maud LaRue says, but it is understanding the individual differences and how that behavior or that urge or that the idea is meeting the need within the individual difference. Is when we understand that, then I can have access to solving the problem and be creative. So just that, I would say that really is so important in this whole conversation, is curiosity.
I would close by saying just trust the relationship that you had previous to where you think things are going wrong. Just to trust that, and that to keep in mind that it's always about the intent. So sometimes we make mistakes, and those mistakes are good. That's part of floor time because that's how we have opportunities to repair. But to know that your intent was there, it's in a good place, and sometimes that could make it so we're not so hard on ourselves as parents, as clinicians too. That's clear projection right there, but okay.
We didn't touch on this at all so far, but I think it's woven into what we think about and how we approach floor time. the idea of presuming competence, and applying that to parents, that it's a very like infant mental health kind of stance that I think most people who work with families would embrace, that people are doing the best they can within the circumstances they are in the moment and the options they perceive around them for how to handle it. And to have that compassion for oneself of like, oh, wow, that was an interesting reaction, or I don't think that was the way I want to tell my parent coach I handled boundary setting this week, right? To have that compassion that people are doing the best that they can in any given moment. And so is the child, that rules and limits make more sense as development unfolds. And at the same time, it does start with, I want to be with you, and how do we navigate that? And how do we navigate what the circumstances are and what the perceived choices are around us?
Well, thank you guys so much for doing this podcast. And again, I feel like we taunted the listener with so many points that could be elaborated on so much further, but some of them are in other podcasts that I mentioned. I'll link to at affectautism.com. Thank you for this DIR Dialogues. I appreciate all of you.
You've been listening to DIR Dialogues from Affect Autism. If you have an idea for a DIR dialogue topic, please shoot me an email. Thanks for listening. This episode of DIR Dialogues is made possible with the generous financial support of Affect Autism's members at patreon.com/affectautism and of the International Council on Development and Learning, ICDL.com. Please share this episode on social media, sign up for our newsletter, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Instagram. Find out more at affectautism.com.